and you're on your own for the first time, the world can be an extraordinary place, exciting, all these new things to find out, but it can also be dangerous and scary. I mean, who are my friends? Who do I need to look out for? How do I fend for myself? Well, that's the life of a teenager. And oh, the growing pains. Hi, I'm Ranger Naomi Boak, and I'm here on the Lower River platform with Mike Fitz, Explore.org's resident naturalist. And behind us is the Bruce River and Dumpling Mountain and a plain. And I hope during the broadcast there'll be bears back there, because there have been a number of subadult bears hanging out with us, and that's the topic for today, the teenagers of the bear world. So we talk about subadults, and there are a lot of challenges for subadults, a lot of learning. They're very curious, very playful. But what is a subadult?
Yeah, I think it's important to define what that term means, because it's not something that we throw around in the human world, although every one of us goes through our own sort of version of the subadult years. So a subadult basically is an independent juvenile bear. It's a bear that has been weaned. It's living apart from its mother now during the first few years of its life, but it's not fully mature. And generally that happens between the ages of, like, let's say 2 and 5 or 2 and 6. They transition into adulthood when they reach sexual maturity. That happens around a bear's 5th or 6th year overall. But just like in humans, there's really no set age that happens. So it can happen a little bit earlier in their lives, or maybe just a little bit later, just depending on the overall bear. But physically, you can recognize subadult bears by kind of like their lanky body shape overall. They're growing rapidly. So they often have body parts that are out of proportion from the adult bears that you might see along the river. So they could have like big heads, for instance. This is a subadult that we saw fishing on the lip of Brooks Falls, a few days ago. Yeah, so sometimes big ears, big heads, long lanky legs, things of that nature. So they're not as well filled in either as the adults. And you see the adults even at this time of the year, they typically look really well filled in. And then size-wise, they look small. Naomi, we see them like along the river and stuff like that. But yeah, they're not that small overall. I mean, compared to a human, many of them can weigh 300 pounds or more, especially those that are in like their 3rd or 4th summer. They can definitely be fairly sizable animals. But it's just not like their physical characteristics that help us to define subadult bears. It's actually the way they behave in the environment as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talk of them as teenagers, right? And many of the behaviors are like teenagers. They want to play, and they're curious, and they want to explore, but they have the same job to do as adult bears, which is they need to get fat and they need to eat. But they have different challenges than adult bears do. Do we want to show a challenge that we're seeing off camera?
Well, I've been thinking about that. You may have noticed we're looking kind of side-eye because there's a courting pair of bears there. I mean, if you want to roll with that, we can talk about a behavior that you won't see in subadults,
Right.
and that is this courting process.
All right. Well, we're just going to tell you that it's really distracting to do live chats here because there's so much going on. But really, subadults are, in terms of behavior, they're at the bottom of the hierarchy. So they are a great disadvantage when it comes to what they have to do, which is eat. And they also have to find out relationships. They have interactions with. We're getting cues. Okay, I'm going to continue. I mean, they have interactions with other subadults, and generally, once they've established those relationships, we're making adjustments here. Once they have established relationships with each other, then they can play, they can be around each other, but they've got to steer clear of other bears. And what you see frequently is play that is like play fighting. So that teaches them how to fight when they're older. But also, you can see some fighting and dominant behavior when food is scarce. And we saw that last week when there wasn't a lot of food around and subadult bears were fighting for scraps because the only bears who were really eating were the more dominant bears, and they're certainly not dominant in any way. They've got to fend for themselves and get what they can. So when they tried to scavenge, they're fighting with each other. So it's circumstantial dominance rather than purposeful dominance of the big boars. So speaking of big boars, what is the relationship of a subadult to other bears like
Right.
boars and family groups?
Yeah, they're like as you mentioned, they're at the bottom rung of the hierarchy. They generally are just going to avoid larger bears. Right now, it's kind of just off camera here. We actually have a very large bear, number 747, who's courting a female. Any subadult that comes into this vicinity in this situation right now is going to probably look, get a whiff of what's going on, and then turn tail and move the other direction, if not run in the other direction. So with the adults, they're generally trying to avoid those confrontations as much as they can because they realize, even as young bears, they're still very smart. They realize that they can't physically compete with those bears. But also we see them sometimes interacting with family groups as well, Naomi. And you would think that, well, maybe a subadult could be more dominant than a cub, but that's really not the case at all.
That was a good teenage posture you just did.
Yeah. So, subadults, they will recognize that family groups are also more dominant than them. And sometimes cubs can actually realize this as well. Cubs are, in a sense, kind of like those subadult bears, or they're willing to test their boundaries. And we occasionally see cubs looking at a subadult bear, the subadult looking, let's say, unsure of itself in that situation, and the cub immediately realizes, hey, maybe this is a situation that I can take advantage of. Oh, and by the way, I have my bodyguard hanging out right behind me here, right. And we'll sometimes see, it's even like yearlings or 2.5-year-olds chase away older bears in those situations. So it's a time for them where they're facing a lot of strife. They're displaced from an incredible amount of habitat, but it's also about finding their place, I think, on the river, for instance. Yeah. Making mistakes like this, maybe falling off of the waterfall, but, learning to fish without mother's guidance. They watch mother's guidance, mother's lessons when they move into the river, when they're going to Brooks Falls, for instance. And then when they're on the own, I think we can bring up a clip of a subadult bear from a few days ago fishing the lip of Brooks Falls. They're going to, practice. And at first, it seems very difficult for them. But they're persistent. They're persistent animals. They can put two and two together, even if, like, mother bear didn't take them to the lip of Brooks Falls, for instance. They can see other bears have had success there, and they're willing to try it. They're willing to give it a shot. And that bear on the lip of Brooks Falls, very young, maybe a 2.5 or 3.5-year-old bear. But when it's catching that salmon on the lip, it's setting itself up for a lifetime of success. So you will see a lot of experimentation and sometimes some innovation amongst these young bears. And I think that is one of the things that makes them so fun to watch.
Right. I mean, we saw a little innovation last year when a subadult decided that a gull would be a filling meal. I'm pretty sure that subadult didn't learn that from mom. So, they are quite innovative. And but when they grow into adulthood, how do their personalities stay the same? Do they morph? Do their techniques change? I mean, you've shown me an example of, for instance, Bear 128, and how she's changed from when she was a cub to now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's interesting and fun to watch that process through the bear cams. You and I are fortunate to come to Brooks River frequently over the last several years, and we get to see a lot of these bears, in person, but not a lot of other people have that opportunity. But Bear Cam gives us that chance to see some of these young bears growing into adults. And this is very young 128 grazer. This is her in, I think, 2008. Just a note of clarification, she didn't get her current ID number until the next year, but I'm positive that is her. So we saw her along the river. She wasn't nearly as defensive as she is today, especially when she's caring for those cubs. You know, she got her nickname because she was grazing on vegetation a lot, and that's something that we see a lot of young bears doing. But now she's matured into this successful adult bear that doesn't really reflect sort of like the timid nature of her younger self. So again, that's the transitional process that we see in a lot of these bears, the growth and the maturation that we see them go through. And she's not the only example that we can bring up. I think you wanted to maybe talk about 909 and
Yeah,
her maturation process.
which is kind of just the opposite of 128 Grazer, because 909 is a cub of Beadnose, and has a sister 910. And as cubs, those were the most rambunctious cubs I'd ever seen. And when they became independent subadults, they played a lot together. Here you see 909 and 910 playing with each other in the river. They were very curious and very brave. They'd investigate our cabins, and not inside, but so very brave and forward. But now, this year, 909 came back as she's barely an adult, but obviously sexually mature, and came back with two spring cubs. And unfortunately, she lost one.
And we
But
don't know why, just
yeah,
to clarify that.
yeah, we don't know how that happened. But she now seems more timid than she was as a subadult, because she now has a new life experience. She's trying to figure it out. So we've had an example of where she's gone from being kind of sassy from day one to being a little more tempered. So we do see these behaviors, but she'll be very interesting to watch over the next 2 years as she raises this cub and figures out more, how do I feed myself, feed my cub, thrive in as an adult. And another bear that you've had the privilege of watching in person grow up, and I had the privilege of watching on the bear cams when he was a young bear, and that is Bear 32 Chunk. Tell us about Chunk as a subadult.
Yeah, he was always a pudgy little dude. I mean, that's kind of how he got his nickname. This is Little Chunk here. I think this is 2007 when he was a 2.5-year-old. I'd like to revisit some of these pictures of these younger bears that we're seeing at these very large adults to remind myself of, again, the growth and changes that they've gone through in their lives. Right now, 32 Chunk is a very large bear. This is him not even at his maximum size. I think this is him in 2014, so several years ago. And as he matured, we saw him become a little bit bolder. Stealing fish, for instance, during his kind of like early adulthood years. And now he's just like this big guy. He still kind of carries some seeds of both, being a very dominant bear, but also of like his youth, for instance. You can see that wound on his muzzle. That's new this year. Very prominent wound. I suspect that he'll heal from that quite well. So it's probably painful for him, but I don't expect that it'll cause him any permanent harm. But we also see him, sometimes acting very playfully around other bears, even though he is like one of the biggest bears along the river. So sometimes those younger bears or those adult bears will carry a lot of those characteristics that they had when they were younger into adulthood. We certainly can see that.
Yeah, and if we take a look at another bear that we watched from cubhood through subadulthood, and that's Bear 503. And he might be similar to Chunk in some ways, but we still have to find out. Bear 503, as a yearling, was abandoned by his mother because his mother went into estrus. But he was adopted by Bear 435 Holly as that yearling when she had a cub, and so he got an extra year with a mother. And he is a very social bear. In his sub-adulthood, he'd frequently play with a lot of other young bears.
One of the most playful bears I think I've ever seen through those years.
Yeah, I'm sort of convinced that part of the reason that he was able to be adopted was his social skills. So now that he is a young adult bear, first of all, he's huge, and that will be very critical in his life going forward, because you can't really be a big bear and just kind of hang out in the woods. You've got other big bears to deal with. So the question is, will he be social like he's always been, or will he have to be a little more aggressive and a little more dominant? And I think we're starting to see some of that change in him now. A little less likely to let other young bears take some of his catch, defending his fishing spots a little more. But I think that he could be a little like Chunk, right? Because Chunk has tried to move up in the hierarchy, but he still plays with other bears. So 503 really is a bear to watch now that he's a young adult, and we've got to watch him through being a subadult. So, Mike, let's think about other bears that are subadults currently that we like to look at. I am really interested in what I call the 402s, and there are 3 subadults whose mother was 402, and we saw them learn how to fish on the lip of the falls with her. Here you see the 3 of them. She's caught a fish, and they're wanting that fish, but this is their mother took them on the lip of the falls very early, and we saw them last year hanging out with each other a lot throughout the season. So this is obviously early in the season. They're skinny bears.
And this is after they were weaned.
This is after they wean. They are subadults. So I'm interested in seeing what happens with them this year. Are they going to be hanging out together? Will we see any of them fishing on the lip of the falls like they learned from mom? And another bear that is a subadult that I'm very interested in is the largest cub now emancipated from Bear 9-4. Bear 9-4 kept her cubs for an extra year, and her large cub, now a subadult, has been seen around camp, and he does not want to leave camp. 9-4 and those cubs really kind of owned their space last year. They did not want to be moved out of camp. They chewed on cottonwood trees. So I'm going to be very interested to see what kind of behavior this very large now subadult has. So what subadult are you interested in, Mike?
Yeah, it's difficult to pick. I mean, there's so many along the river, and I know also that they can be hard to identify. So I'm going to, like the 402s, for instance, I know some of the webcam viewers feel really confident in identifying those. I don't feel like the same way, honestly.
No.
So I have, I suspect, maybe I'm seeing them every once in a while, but I tend to be a little hesitant in IDing them positively. However, there's one subadult that we've been seeing around the river, very blonde, very conspicuous, and even if you're new to watching bear cam, I think it's a relatively easy one for everyone to identify, and that's number 131. This was the offspring of 482 Brett, and it's one of those, kind of like typical subadult bears that you'll find a little bit curious, sometimes a little bit bold, hovering on the fringes of Brooks Falls. And with these young bears, within my experience, I've never really been able to find an indication when they're young that they're going to become like a super successful adult, for instance, like a giant like 856 or 747, for instance, or a really successful mom like Holly or Grazer, who we talked about earlier. So, with 131, it's one of those, kind of young bears that is conspicuous because of its, she is so blonde, but it's also an opportunity for us to watch that bear as just like a typical run-of-the-mill young subadult and see if those storylines develop into something different as it transitions into adulthood.
And also, it's one of the great things about Explore that we can follow these bears through many years and many transitions. And the other thing that's interesting about following a bear like 131 is that females tend to stick to their home range a lot more than the males do. So there was a subadult that many of us who watched the bear cams got very attached to, and that bear was nicknamed Velcro, and he came back a bit, but we don't see him now, and that's very common for male subadults to go to another location. And so 131 should be a bear that we will get to watch over the years.
Yeah, it's much more likely that the female young bears will stick around, but the dispersal process takes many years. Sometimes they'll come back for that first year, and then after that they're like, well, you know what, I'm feeling like I can maybe move on and try to find my own home range. So that helps to genetically diversify a population, especially among the male bears that are moving much farther than females. But Naomi, as we come up to our conclusion here, we're going to try to get to a few viewer questions in just a little bit. There's one more point that I always like to bring up when we're talking subadult bears, and that happens to be, a comparison to the human years. The teenage years. I mean, this is a process that we've all sort of experienced. That I remember adolescence as being a time of awkwardness.
Well, it was only a few years ago for you. So.
Oh, sure, right, yeah. Everyone knows that, right? So this is subadult Mike right here. So this is circa 1996, rocking a mullet. You can call that either heavy metal hair.
Oh, that's the one with the mullet I saw the other day.
Yeah. Or hockey hair, whatever you wanted to call it. I think the biggest mistake I made though in this photo is as a Penguins fan, wearing a New York Rangers t-shirt. You can't really tell that, I'm glad.
Well, being a New Yorker, I'm very very happy in your choice of t-shirts. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it's an awkward time for all of us. I remember not feeling comfortable with my skin, and not really having my personality hadn't fully developed by that time. So, we're seeing that same thing in a lot of these young bears. Although I will also add that many people think I am just as goofy looking. I mean, handsome as I was then.
Well, I think you're more handsome now. You're just still as goofy.
Okay, that's a great way of putting it. So, yeah, the subadult years are full of strife, learning, competition. It's really a remarkable experience to watch these bears on Brooks River grow into adulthood. So we pay a lot of attention to the big males up at Brooks Falls and a lot of the mothers with cubs, but pay attention to those younger bears. They have some really important stories to tell us as well.
Yeah. So, do we have questions from the viewers?
I think so. Let's pull some up here.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, who among our current subadults do you think is worth watching, and why? And I think we covered a few of those, maybe some of those 402s. The 94 bear that you mentioned, that one doesn't have an identification number yet because it was just emancipated.
Emancipated this year.
Okay. Yeah.
So another bear that I'm interested in, and I'm not going to say the number because I'm not sure about it, but it was the cub that was sick as a yearling and on death's door. But we have seen that cub now subadult. So I'm very interested in how that bear fares because it had kind of an extra year early on of independence. So that's another bear that I would watch.
And how long will emancipated siblings continue to hang out with each other? It depends on their tolerance for one another, sometimes for a whole summer. I don't think there's a whole lot of evidence that they den together. At least I don't remember that. I think it's after, their full first summer of independence. It's possible though, but probably they're going to become more independent as the summer continues. I think we see that with younger bears. I remember that with 909 and 910. They were kind of inseparable at the beginning of the season, and then towards the end of that first summer where they were independent, they were on their own more frequently. And then the next year they came back and they were frequently around one another, but not nearly as much so as their first year. So it depends on the individual bear. A lot of times, yeah, they'll hang out for a brief period of time. Some of them just immediately just decide, hey, I'm just gonna head off onto my own way. So it depends on the individual bear.
Sibling rivalries can exist among bears as well.
Do cubs ever try to move home after emancipation? That kind of goes back to their dispersal afterwards.
Right. Well, I'm not. Should we talk about Bear 719? I mean, she didn't.
Sure.
So Holly's cubs, Bear 719, who had her adopted sibling 503, and when she was emancipated, I didn't notice her going back to Holly, but she um, trailed bear 402 who had cubs. So it seems she didn't really want to be alone yet and still wanted a mom. But Mike, do you know of instances I'm, where subadults have tried to say, "Hey, mom, I need to come back home"?
No, I haven't. Usually the mothers are just intolerant of their weaned offspring. So we've even seen like a bear like Holly, who's normally very tolerant of the presence of other bears, charge her former cubs and say, "Hey, just back off. I kicked you out of the house. I don't want you coming back." So we don't really see those happy reunions as they sort of like grow into adulthood. Um, Former or offspring growing into adulthood and they encounter their mother bears. Often at best, they just ignore each other. Usually, that's about as far as it goes.
Yeah.
But the females, yeah, they will more often establish a home range that overlaps with their mother. It can happen with males too. We see that on, as we talked about with some of these examples, but it's less likely to happen in males. Oh, and the frog bear. Can Mike ID the frog bear who's been on the rock? This one.
It's a different frog bear, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is not number 94. Number 94 loves to sit on rocks like this. Given that fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this was, one of her cubs that she weaned this year. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the common answer that Mike and I give when you try to show us subadults. We don't know. But the frog bear that was on social media is bear 94, and she's been doing that for many years. Is that it?
No, I think we might have a couple of more
Okay.
in here. Yep. And do they return to the general area where mom hibernated? That's, I don't think something that has been studied a whole lot. But I think there is some evidence that at least bears show like a fidelity towards a denning area. And I know some biologists have hypothesized that maybe that's a spot that they were shown with their mothers and they just return to it because they know that's a good denning spot instead of taking a chance and going someplace else. But for the bears that disperse farther out of their mother's home range, obviously that's not going to happen. But sometimes bears have, yeah, they will go back, over long distances to a specific denning area. So that could be a spot where they happen to realize it was just good conditions, and maybe they were shown that, by their mother. What do subadults do at Brooks River early in the season before they form any groups or come together? What were you seeing in May and June before the salmon?
Oh, well, we did not see subadults hanging out together, and they're searching around. They're really trying to figure out what their limits are. They tend to be a little timid, but not all of them. I mean, some of them, like 9-4's large, now subadult, is not very timid. But you see some of the newly emancipated bears, and they're small, and they're really trying to figure out what's going on. But what I've observed is that sometime around now, you start seeing the subadults have found each other. And it's just like teenagers. There are gangs of subadults running around. The other day, Ranger Leon, who's helping us out in the background today, she and I were walking back from the Falls Trail, and there were 3 subadults racing down the Falls Trail. And I remember a couple years ago, there were 13 subadults racing around this platform. So in the beginning of the season, they are not hanging out with each other. They have to make friends, kind of like regular teenagers.
Yeah, they're especially after they get well fed too. If there's a good push of fish like we saw the other day here at the river, then they're much more likely to express, I think, some of those playful behaviors. And do the subadult hormones drive them apart eventually as they age? Yeah, certainly. I think that change that they undergo into adulthood can alter their personality. Like we just don't see them being as playful as their, let's say, priorities shift into other things and maybe establishing a higher level of dominance, for instance, or reproducing.
Right. I mean, do you think that they learn after a while? I mean, it's really tough for a subadult to make a living. And do they learn some efficiencies and say, well, I've got to make eating more of a priority than playing?
Especially if you're a mother bear. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I don't think you can carry like that playfulness into adulthood typically. And we saw some exceptions to that last year with the incredible salmon run that happened here, the record-breaking salmon run that happened here last year. But this year, kind of a more typical year, so it just doesn't there's just not enough food to release those adult bears into those more playful behaviors that they had the luxury of expressing when they were younger.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a subadult catch a fish on the lip? Yeah, it's not something that you're going to see necessarily every day or every year, but certainly, yeah, we were watching this bear just a few nights ago do just that, learning that behavior, and I think that's it's fascinating to watch them in that location learn that because it's a difficult skill, but they master it fairly quickly when given the chance. Or also maybe even trying like the jacuzzi or the far pool during times when there aren't like big adults in those locations. You'll see that the young bear goes in there and they're like, I saw another bear do this. How does this work? And they just can't get it right away. But they try and they try and they try, and when they find success, you'll see them returning to those spots frequently. It's like they just don't forget.
Yeah, well, and that's really helpful. I mean, why give up something that you've succeeded at? Last night there was a subadult who was not quite on the lip, but he was at the edge of the falls, a little over, and kind of just almost crouched down and not very successful. And I'm sure that subadult is not going to go back to that spot anytime soon.
And I think that's all for our viewer questions right now. But Naomi, great chat. It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah. And my name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. My co-host today, Ranger Naomi Boak from Katmai National Park. Tune in for our other live bear cam events coming up this summer. And thanks for watching this one, and we'll talk to you soon.